Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Thanks for listening, whether it's on America One Radio, the app, the .com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, podcast. However you listen, I do appreciate that. The last 5 weeks have been insanely crazy busy for anyone who follows politics, who works in politics, and there's no rest for the wicked, right? We're less than 75 days before Election Day now. We have a compact schedule. The New York Times, by the way, put out a piece this morning. I saw it in my inbox. Their letter each morning via email that talks about the benefits of a shorter presidential campaign versus a prolonged campaign, which I think we've gotten used to. I think Donald Trump has been running for president for about 3 years now. I could be wrong. It's at least 2, right? I mean, he announced his campaign shortly before indictments started dropping like flies. Anyway, this is going to be another one of those crazy weeks. The Democratic National Convention, confetti and balloons finished dropping Thursday night. Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, Governor Tim Walz decided to take the weekend to just kind of catch their breath. And they should. My gosh, it's been a crazy 4 or 5 weeks. At least for Kamala Harris, and for Tim Walz, it's been a crazy couple of weeks himself. Good to let them catch their breath, and then they're going to hit the road again today. Not today, but later this week. As a matter of fact, as I was waking up Saturday morning and heading off to go play some softball, which was not a good decision since I'm aching everywhere. I've got a bad shoulder. My ribs are bruised from this little scuffle thing that I had to deal with inside my building. I talked to you a little bit about that last week, right? Still got a little bit of a ginger ankle on the left side. What was I thinking? Anyway, I was getting up and I was watching NBC Today Saturday morning, and then I saw this come out.
Vice President Kamala Harris is spending the weekend away from the trail after a historic Democratic National Convention, but this morning her campaign is announcing her next stop in a crucial battleground state and where it plans to go from there. NBC's Ali Rafa is in Southern California, where President Biden is spending his weekend. Ali, good morning.
Peter, good morning. After a week of pomp and pageantry at the Democrats' convention, campaign officials say Vice President Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, will take a few days off the campaign trail to regroup, returning on Wednesday to kick off a bus tour through battleground Georgia together, which the Harris campaign says will wrap on Thursday night with a rally in Savannah with the vice president.
Oh, man. Wednesday, like I told myself this week, Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to go down to stay at a friend's lake house and just chill for 2 or 3 days and maybe throw some best ofs on the grill for you guys so that you have something to marinate on while I'm no. Now we've got battleground bus stops, a bus tour Wednesday and Thursday. So you know what? I'm still going to the lake. I'm just taking the equipment with me. There. So I'll get up each morning. I'll do a show from the lake and then get to relaxing as if I were simply on a full vacation. To be honest with you, having worked in radio for most of my life, I don't know the last time I went on a vacation where I didn't have work to do anyway. So why should this one be any different? It's not really a vacation anyway. It's just a couple of days I had decided to take to just kind of chill and unwind. I've got a big real estate closing today, so I can just kind of do as Harris and Walz are doing. Big moment, cash in, catch my breath, and then come back to work later this weekend. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to just go off on my own little person. It's not about me. It's not all about me in this scenario.
Newly minted Democratic ticket then expected to seize on the convention's energy by hosting multiple fundraisers and barnstorming battleground states right into Labor Day weekend, a traditional kickoff to the final sprint to November. Harris and Walz are also slated to sit down for their first joint interview next week after mounting pressure on Harris to lay out more of her policy positions. And while it's still not clear who the sit down will be with and when, the interview no doubt provides an opportunity for the new standard bearer of the Democratic Party to prove her doubters wrong. Peter?
And Ali, there's another key moment in this race, perhaps the next big one. It's going to take place September 10th, the first presidential debate between former President Trump and the vice president. How is Harris expected to prepare for that?
Well, sources familiar with her planning say that Harris has already started holding mock debate sessions at her alma mater of Howard University to prepare to face off against former President Trump, who Harris has actually never met or spoken with in person. The Harris team tapping longtime Democratic strategist Philippe Reines to reprise his role of playing Trump during Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign for the vice president's prep sessions. A Harris campaign official says she'll take a few days off the campaign trail ahead of debate day, with Governor Walz taking on a heavier travel schedule in that period.
Yeah, about that debate, the Washington Post's Marianne Levine reporting here that former President Donald Trump suggested Sunday evening that he might skip that September 10th ABC News debate with Vice President Kamala Harris after agreeing to participate as the GOP presidential nominee earlier in the month. He did tweet this out on Truth Social. I watched ABC fake news this morning. Both lightweight reporter Jonathan Karl's ridiculous and biased interview of Tom Cotton, who was fantastic, and their so-called panel of Trump haters, and I ask, why would I do the debate against Kamala Harris on that network? He asks. His screed continues. Will panelist Donna Brazil give the questions to the Marxist candidate like she did for crooked Hillary Clinton? Will Kamala's best friend who heads up ABC do likewise? Where is little George Stephanopoulos hanging out now? Will he be involved? They've got a lot of questions to answer. 3 exclamation points, so you know he's angry. Why did Harris turn down Fox, NBC, CBS, and even CNN? Stay tuned. 3 exclamation points again. It'll be wild. Here's what we can guarantee, y'all. We can guarantee one of two things are going to happen. Either Donald Trump is going to weasel out of this debate and whine about the fake news angle, or he'll show up and whine about the fake news angle. It's one or the other, and in either case, this doesn't get to the heart of talking about anything of substance. We've seen this at countless debates. And I'm not even talking about the binaries. I'm not talking about the Clinton-Trump debates. I'm not talking about the Biden-Trump debates. I'm talking GOP debates. He doesn't have substantive conversation. He doesn't bring up anything of substance. It's all theater, and it's monkeys flinging poop in the cage, and we can expect that to happen again. Or he just won't show up and fling poop from outside the monkey cage. Whatever. It is what it is. I've surmised that, and I think polls show this, I've surmised that I think the American people have sort of grown weary of multiple seasons of The Celebrity Apprentice that have run past its course. What were we tapping out at The Walking Dead? Like 7 seasons, 8 seasons? We just had enough. And I think the American public has had enough of this crazy clown TV show too. Now, getting back to serious people. Remember, he's an unserious man. Getting back to serious people, Vice President Kamala Harris, Governor Tim Walz will be on that bus tour through South Georgia Wednesday into Thursday, where they will cap at a rally in Savannah. Remember, she was going to appear in Savannah and canceled. What was it for? I'm trying to remember what it was canceled for. Oh, yeah, there was a tropical storm. Anyway, I'm going to be talking tomorrow morning with Byron County, Georgia Democratic Party Chair Keith McCants, who has been on the show. In fact, he was on the show when the Ron Show first launched. I want to say the first month or so. He is a cool guy. He's an NRA member. He's a small business owner. He actually was an elected official in South Georgia before. He happens to be a black man. And again, chair of the Bryan County Democratic Party. I bring all of this up because he doesn't really fit the profile completely of what I think someone would envision a Democrat looking like or living like. But I find this rural bus tour to be exciting. No, very exciting, actually. I said when Stacey Abrams was making her second go for governor in the state of Georgia in 2022 on this show in its early weeks and months that the Abrams campaign's big mistake in my mind was spending so much time where they had vote support sewn up. Large cities, reliable Democratic stronghold county enclaves, and not going to cull votes in the rural parts of the state. And here I see Harrison Walz saying, man, screw that. Georgia's a swing state. We need every vote. 11,781 of them. Anyway, I'm excited to see that. I think this is an important step that it also shows that Democrats are not afraid to go where they may not have the majority, but you don't need to have the majority to feel like it's safe to go and rally votes, right? Georgia's a swing state and every vote's going to matter. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be barnstorming in Iowa, although I think they should. I mean, they can make a difference in Iowa. You don't know. It's a small populated state. You could, but I mean, this takes me back to the Howard Dean strategy, the 50-state strategy that I think makes a lot of sense. And having a Governor Tim Walz on the ticket really, to me, gives us an opportunity in places I don't think Democrats had previously thought that they could be relatable. Tim Walz hunts, he fishes. What do they call him? The REI candidate instead of the DEI candidate? The REI candidate, I love that. No, seriously, this is a good thing, a positive step. Glad to see them barnstorming in parts of the state, even though it's a swing state, parts of the state that wouldn't necessarily come to top of mind for a Democratic tandem rallying. I was reading this NBC News piece that came with the video you just heard. Though it's unclear exactly where Harrison Walz will go, southern Georgia is home to some of the state's largest black populations, including Dougherty County, which has the second highest proportion of black residents in the state. The campaign has opened field offices in the predominantly black cities of Albany and Valdosta. So I was reading a few minutes ago from Trump's Truth Social, and there's another post that I want to point out. This is the third anniversary, or marking the third anniversary of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Donald Trump doing his best to tie Kamala Harris to that. So we'll dive in on that here in just a minute. I also have a guest from the Fulton County Animal Rescue that I'm going to cap my show with today. They are coordinating with the folks at Comcast, NBC Universal, to offer fee-free pet adoptions through September 10th. And those shelters, DeKalb, Fulton, Lifeline Animal Project, they are packed to the beyond packed, actually. So they're encouraging folks to come adopt. Don't have to shop at all. No money spent. Come pick out a pet. Audrey Shoemaker, my guest. We'll discuss that in just a few minutes on The Ron Show when we return on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. Thanks for listening. You can follow the show on your preferred social media platforms. That would be at Ron Show ATL, the Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I have yet to launch a TikTok. I have a personal TikTok that I rarely use. Maybe it's a generational thing. I'm a 50-year-old white guy. What am I doing on TikTok? No, I mean, I enjoy TikTok. It reminds me of, what was the one? Vine. It reminds me of Vine. But if the federal government's going to ban it, I'm not going to invest too much into it just yet. That being said, this TikTok video really caught my attention, and it's like earworm. I woke up listening to it this morning in my ear. You ever wake up and there's a song stuck in your head? This song was stuck in my head because somebody shared this with me last night.
Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
Oh, no.
Those black jobs. One of those black jobs. Those black jobs. One of those black jobs. Those black jobs. One of those. Who's going to tell him that the job might be one of those black jobs?
I'm here to do my black job. I'm here to do my black job.
Those black jobs. One of those. Who's gonna tell him that the job might be one of those black jobs?
Attorney General.
Might be one of those black jobs.
Vice President.
Might be one of those black jobs.
I wish you could see the video.
Might be one of those. Who's gonna tell him that the job might be one of those black jobs?
Lots
Attorney General.
Might be one
of
of
Kamala Harris dancing in the video.
Might be
President.
one of those black jobs.
President Kamala Harris.
Might be one of those black jobs. Those black jobs. Those black jobs. One of those black jobs. Those black jobs.
Kamala's danced a lot.
Those black jobs. One of those. Who's gonna tell him that the job might be one of those black jobs?
I'm here to do my black job. I'm here to do my black job.
Those black jobs. One of those. Who's gonna tell him that the job might be one of those black jobs?
That is a banger. That is a bop, as the kids would say. Yeah. So how do I do this? I'll share the TikTok. I'll put the TikTok link in the show notes at ronshowatl.com so you can see it for yourself. You have to see this. Kamala Harris has apparently danced a lot in front of cameras, and who knew? Although I have to say, the mom jeans, the pink mom jeans in the video, there's one, it's like, ugh, don't wear that again. Don't. It's not. I'm a gay man, I can say this, right? How about this for a little news item over the weekend? CNN reporting that Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster has a new book out where he has a blistering account of his time inside the Trump White House. I mean, we already know that all but like 4 of his cabinet officials from his first presidency, and we know his vice president among them, are not standing in line to endorse Donald Trump. We talked a little bit last week. Kamala Harris, in her acceptance speech, spoke of the fear of a Donald Trump with no guardrails. Henry McMaster's new book really lays some credence to that. Peter Bergen at CNN writing, until now, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster has held his fire about his stint in the Trump White House. McMaster served with distinction in key American conflicts of the past decades, the Gulf War, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, which we'll get to in a little bit. But as McMaster recounts in his new book, At War with Ourselves, My Tour of Duty in the Trump White House, in some ways, his most challenging tour as a soldier was his last one in serving as the National Security Advisor to a notoriously mercurial president. Bergen writes, in his blistering, insightful account of his time in the Trump White House, McMaster describes meetings in the Oval Office as, quote, exercises in competitive sycophancy, during which Trump's advisors would flatter the president by saying stuff like, your instincts are always right, or no one has ever been treated so badly by the press. Meanwhile, Trump would say outlandish things like, why don't we just bomb the drugs in Mexico? Or why don't we take out the whole North Korean army during one of their parades? Now, for a little background, I'm going to scan down to this part in the article. In McMaster's first book, Dereliction of Duty, Johnson, McNamara, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Lies That Led to Vietnam, he recounted the dismal history of how the top American generals told President Lyndon Johnson only what they thought he wanted to hear about the Vietnam War, rather than giving him their best military advice about how the conflict was going and the full range of policy options that were open to the commander-in-chief. McMaster says he wasn't going to make the same mistake after Trump tapped him to be his national security advisor in February 2017. He writes, I knew that to fulfill my duty, I would have to tell Trump what he didn't want to hear. Bergen writes, this helps explain why McMaster lasted just over a year on the job. One subject was particularly neuralgic for Trump, Russia. McMaster astutely observes, I wished that Trump could separate the issue of Russian election meddling from the legitimacy of his presidency. He could have said, yes, they attacked the election, but Russia didn't care who wins our elections. What they want to do is pit Americans against one another. McMaster writes that the, quote, fragility of Trump's ego and, quote, his deep sense of aggrievement would never allow him to make this kind of distinction. McMaster says he felt it was his duty to point out to Trump that Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, was not and would never be Trump's friend. McMaster warned Trump that Putin is, quote, the best liar in the world and would try to, quote, play Trump to get what he wanted and manipulate him with, quote, ambiguous promises of a better relationship. In fact, the article alludes to the fact that McMaster had said something at a Munich security forum that the indictment of a group of Russian intelligence officers for their interference in the 2016 presidential election was, quote, incontrovertible evidence of Russian meddling in the election, because Trump tweeted after the fact, General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians. That's when McMaster knew that his days were numbered. McMaster's account of the Trump team is not pretty. Steve Bannon, Trump's chief strategist early in the presidency, is portrayed as a, quote, fawning court jester who played, quote, on Trump's anxiety and sense of beleaguerment, with stories mainly about who was out to get him and what he could do to, quote, counterpunch. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Secretary of Defense James Mattis were often at odds with Trump, McMaster says. Tillerson, who had previously run Exxon, is portrayed as inaccessible to top officials in Trump's administration, while Mattis is described as an obstructionist. McMaster writes that Tillerson and Mattis viewed Trump as, quote, dangerous and seemed to construe their roles as if, quote, Trump was an emergency and that anyone abetting him was an adversary. Trump himself also contributed to the dysfunction. Quote, he enjoyed and contributed to interpersonal drama in the White House and across the administration. The article, by the way, from Peter Bergen and CNN, I'll put in the show notes at ronshowytl.com. Bergen writes in his new book, McMaster writes that in the aftermath of his 2020 electoral defeat, Trump's, quote, ego and love of self drove him to abandon his oath to support and defend the Constitution, a president's highest obligation. McMaster adds, the attack on the U.S. Capitol stained our image, and it will take a long-term effect to restore what Donald Trump, his enablers, and those who encouraged took from us that day. It is a scathing. The article's scathing. I can't wait to see the book. He touched a lot on Afghanistan, too, by the way, and he's a little bit more hawkish than I think most of us would have been, had the appetite for in that moment. But let's talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal situation, because Donald Trump wants to harp on Biden and Kamala Harris on that today on the third anniversary of that withdrawal. We will touch on that when the Ron Show returns here on the America One Radio app, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
An Associated Press article filed by Adriana Gomez-Licon early this morning cites that former President Donald Trump is expected to tie Vice President Kamala Harris to the chaotic Afghanistan war withdrawal on the third anniversary of the suicide bombing that killed 13 service members. The same Donald Trump that called veterans suckers and losers wants to take an opportunity on the death of 13 service members to politicize the Afghanistan withdrawal. Back to the article. Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, is expected to visit Arlington National Cemetery to pay his respects to the service members killed in the bombing outside the Kabul airport. Trump will then go to Michigan to address the National Guard Association of the United States Conference. Monday marks 3 years since the August 26, 2021 suicide bombing at Hamid Karzai International Airport, which killed 13 American service members and more than 100 Afghans. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack. Since President Joe Biden ended his re-election bid, Trump has been zeroing in on Harris, now the Democratic presidential nominee, and her roles in foreign policy decisions. He specifically highlights the vice president's statements that she was the last person in the room before Biden made the decision on Afghanistan. She bragged that she would be the last person in the room, and she was. She was the last person in the room with Biden when the two of them decided to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, he said last week at a North Carolina rally. She had the final vote, she had the final say, and she was all for it. Donald Trump is amazing in how it just blows my mind. It amazes me how he removes himself from a situation that his smudgy little Cheeto fingerprints are all over in the first place. Like, who negotiated that Afghanistan withdrawal? Who was president when the decision was made to pull the troops from Afghanistan, which I, by the way, do not question tapping out on, saying, all right, enough's enough. You're listening to me say Donald Trump should get credit for saying no more, it's time to go. I'm not saying that that was a bad decision. I'm saying all of what went into the negotiation made it an absolute shit show, which we saw play out 3 years ago today. Like, why were we negotiating with the Taliban? Why was the Taliban even at the table? They were, though. Whose decision was that? I mean, that happened on Donald Trump's watch. He signed off on it. What about the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners who had been held? Why were they released? And talk about how much they may have contributed to the destabilization of the then Afghan government. The Afghan government that the United States and its taxpayers and the hundreds of thousands of men and women who served in Afghanistan after 9/11 poured their blood, sweat, and tears, sometimes limbs, lives, into to prop up. The release of those prisoners is, to me, a key pivot point. And you heard me talk in the last segment about Henry McMaster, his national security advisor, having to constantly pull Donald Trump from the brink of saying or doing something absolutely batshit stupid bombing the North Korean military while they were parading? Huh? The 5,000 troop release. And look, to McMaster's credit, he wasn't the national security advisor then. I mean, who the hell was still in Donald Trump's ear? The thing to remember about this is this all happened in 2020. The negotiations for the Afghanistan withdrawal happened in 2020. Donald Trump was either busy running for re-election, hyper-focused on that, or in the final weeks and months of his presidency, super focused on the fact that he lost and propagating the big lie. Focused on calling Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes. Less focused on the damn job that he had still for a couple more months. Donald Trump wants everyone to forget that he had a role in the suicide bombing attack 3 years ago today. And sure enough, this morning he's on Truth Social already. This is the 3rd anniversary of the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, the most embarrassing moment in the history of the country. Gross incompetence. 13 dead American soldiers. If you hear me hyper-focusing on a word or leaning on a word, it's because he all capsed it. Hundreds of people wounded and dead. Americans and billions of dollars of military equipment left behind. You don't take our soldiers out first. You take them out last. And when all else is successfully done, Russia then invaded Ukraine, Israel was attacked, and the USA became and is a laughingstock all over the world. The fake news media remained silent in order to protect the worst administration in the history of our country. MAGA 2024. He removes himself completely from any culpability in all of that. I mean, we could talk about Ukraine. We could talk about, McMaster did. McMaster talked about Ukraine and how Trump had a blind spot for Putin. We could talk about Israel and Gaza. We could sit here and talk about, the Middle East was at peace under... No, it was... was then, is now a fractured area of the world. He didn't solve anything. Sure, there were peace treaties being signed between Israel and former foes, but that didn't... He also was the guy that withdrew us from the Iranian nuclear deal. And that reversed a trend where at least the U.S. and Iran were finally starting to show some, I don't want to say compatibility, but an ability to at least have some dialogue. Talking is kind of important. I know it's not fun. It doesn't create fantastic videos of military action, but diplomacy matters. He wants to pin the Hamas attack on Israeli citizens, on Biden and Harris. Like, I'm sorry, you didn't solve Hamas as president. You emboldened Netanyahu, but you didn't solve Hamas. It just amazes me how this man manages to try and revise history and also run around with whiteout to take his name off of anything that doesn't convenience this image that he's trying to burnish on the American people. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Biden-Harris administration handled the Afghanistan withdrawal with perfection, but remember, 5,000 Taliban prisoners released. That really made a mess of things and contributed largely to the collapse of the Afghan government. And the hastened timeline that was set. President Biden had to ask for an extension for it and got it, and then sought to ask for another extension because the military just wasn't ready at the time the deadline had been set. And by then, the Taliban had taken over the Afghan government and were like, no, get out. Well, we have a treaty that we signed with the nation of Afghanistan to get out by a certain date. We'd already gotten that extension, and they weren't going to give another extension. The man's hands were tied. He inherited a bad deal, worked to extend it a little bit, and then once there were no more extensions to be granted, we had a deadline. I'm not going to sit here and absolve Biden of this in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but I sure as shit am not going to forget the guy and the administration that set the table and made the agreement happen in the first place. And, of course, the 5,000 Taliban prisoners who really f***ed up the works. Donald Trump and the Republican Party wants you to forget all of his involvement in the things that blew up in our faces while he was president and after he was president. Supply chain problems, inflation, the Afghanistan withdrawal, today just being the one thing that he's going to focus on today. But we have to keep track of his fingerprints, his involvement, and all of his f***ups. There, I said it. The Ron Show, back after this on the American One Radio app and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final segment of the Ron Show, and there's a lot of noise about the mending of fences. Is that what we'll call it? The mending of fences between Governor Brian Kemp and Donald Trump. We talked a little bit about this last week, but really didn't dive into it. Essentially, Brian Kemp has been on cable news. I believe he was on a Fox News appearance last week and said what he's been saying pretty much publicly for a little while now, that he's going to, do all he can to ensure that Kamala Harris isn't president of the United States. A tacit, not non-endorsement of Donald Trump, but to ensure that Republicans win back the White House. To which Donald Trump has just inferred, that means everything's good between me and Brian Kemp. I don't know about Marty and the girls, but Brian has at least publicly said that he will be voting for and supporting Donald Trump, and there seems to be some sort of a discussion between the two camps anyway about collaborating in some respect. I ain't buying it. I'll believe it when I see it, but until then, I ain't buying it because Trump gonna Trump. Also, there's this. I heard Greg Bluestein break this early this morning. Reading from Mediaite, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp asked his state's attorney general this morning for guidance regarding whether or not he has the power to remove state election board members amid outcry over the changes being made to how Georgia's elections will be administered in the run-up to the 2024 election. AJC's Greg Bluestein reported on Monday that Kemp's office is asking the AG for guidance on whether he has the authority to remove members of the state election board. Voting rights groups, Democrats, and even some Republicans have raised alarms about the right-wing majority's recent votes. Bluestein shared a statement from Kemp's office that read, "This office has received Senator Nabila Islam Parks and others letters alleging ethics violations by members of the state elections board. Due to uncertainty regarding whether the office has authority to act under Code Section 45-10-4, in response to these complaints, we have sought the Attorney General's advice regarding the applications of the statute to the letters. We will respond following receipt of this advice and further evaluation of the letters." I mean, Brian Kemp and Donald Trump just kind of, sort of made up. And now Brian Kemp is asking the Attorney General, Chris Carr, if he has the authority to remove one of the three magnified Georgia State Election Board members. Y'all pop your popcorn. This is going to be delicious. Back to Mediaite. The State Election Board in question is now dominated by a pro-Trump three-person bloc that has made changes to the board, including stripping Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger from chairing the board. Democratic State Senator Nabila Islam Parks is accusing the Trump-aligned board members of holding their meetings in violation of state ethics rules. 3 of the board members violated the Open Meetings Act and the State Code of Ethics, Islam Parks told local media, adding, "They didn't send out a notice to the public. They were warned by their own general counsel. They had it anyway." By the way, going back to the notion that Trump gonna Trump, there is now, I spoke earlier about Donald Trump sort of insinuating that maybe he's not so keen on the idea of doing the scheduled debate September 10th on ABC, with 2 Ds, not a T, little George Stephanopoulos et al. But there's actually a real impasse going on between the Trump and Harris camps. This from Politico Playbook, the secret debate about the Trump-Harris debate. Get this. So, first of all, they start with repeating what I talked about here a few minutes ago, that, Donald Trump was on Truth Social, tearing into ABC News for This Week panel. By the way, one of the authors of the Playbook and Political, Rachel Bade, was on that panel and asking aloud whether he will go through with his scheduled September 10th debate event against VP Kamala Harris. But behind the scenes, well before he clicked the publish button on that post, the two camps hit an impasse over the rules of the debate, according to 4 sources familiar with the issue. The holdup: whether or not the candidates' microphones will be muted when it isn't their turn to speak. You'll remember that was one of the little prerequisites of the Trump and Joe Biden debate. So now the sides have flipped, according to the Politico Playbook authors. Harris's campaign wants the mics to be hot at all times during the ABC debate, as has historically been the case at presidential debates. This quote: "We have told ABC and other networks seeking to host a possible October debate that we believe both candidates' mics should be live throughout the full broadcast." That is Brian Fallon, the Harris campaign's senior advisor for communications, telling Playbook in a text message, confirming their reporting, by the way. He continues, "Our understanding is that Trump's handlers prefer the muted microphone because they don't think their candidate can act presidential for 90 minutes on his own. We suspect Trump's team has not even told their boss about this dispute because it would be too embarrassing to admit they don't think he can handle himself against Vice President Harris without the benefit of a mute button." Oh, my God. Ouch. Y'all let that sink in for just a minute now. Trump's own people want him muted. They want guardrails on him. His campaign seeks guardrails for 90 minutes. But we, the people, the American people, his campaign believes we should sign on for 4 years of Trump with no guardrails once he's back in the Oval Office. I also have to wonder, like, does he ever go into restaurants with any of his handlers? Do they ask him, the server, for like a kids menu, crayons, booster seat, and a sippy cup? This is so juvenile that he has to be handled this way. No, man, let the mics fly. Let the mics go. At this point, let Trump be Trump. I said, was this last week or the week before, that's the strategy. Let Trump be Trump. And not their strategy, the Harris-Walz campaign strategy. Let Trump be Trump. I'm here for it. I mean, that's almost exactly what they're saying. She's more than happy to have exchanges with him if he tries to interrupt her. One person familiar with the negotiations tell Politico Playbook writers. And given how shook he seems by her, he's very prone to having intemperate outbursts, and I think the campaign would want viewers to hear. Now, from the Trump campaign comes a little bit of barking from Jason Miller. Enough with the games. We accepted the ABC debate under the exact same terms as the CNN debate. The Harris camp, he says, after having already agreed to the CNN rules, asked for a seated debate with notes and opening statements. We said no changes to the agreed upon rules. Again, that's Jason Miller, senior advisor for the Trump campaign, telling Politico Playbook last night. He continued, if Kamala Harris isn't smart enough to repeat the messaging points her handlers want her to memorize, that's their problem. This seems to be a pattern for the Harris campaign. They won't allow Harris to do interviews. By the way, she's going to be doing a sit-down later. What else did she say? They won't allow her to do press conferences, and now they want to give her a cheat sheet for the debate. My guess is that they're looking for a way to get out of any debate with President Trump. Hi, Jason. Last night on Truth Social, it was your guy looking for a way out. Just saying. Later on, down in the Political Playbook, I'll have this in the show notes, right? Do I need to say that anymore? RonShowATL.com show notes. As for Miller's assertion that Harris wanted a seated debate with notes, her spokesperson pushed back vigorously. All three parties, Trump, Harris, and ABC, have agreed to standing and no notes, and we never saw it otherwise. Another source familiar with the negotiations laughed when Politico asked if Harris ever asked to be seated, saying it wasn't true. Politico reporting more. We're told that at the time they accepted ABC's invitation, though, the Harris campaign did so while making clear to the network that the rules themselves were up for debate. And if this current snag is any indication, that debate is far from settled. I guess the other big news from over the weekend, well, Donald Trump touched on this a little bit today in Detroit.
Right now, 3 days ago, I was honored to receive the endorsement of Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. We're very proud. Thank you. We're very proud to welcome Bobby to our cause. He's really a terrific guy. He's a terrific person, and he's going to do a lot of great things. I have no doubt about it. He's got some very good ideas, some ideas that people weren't listening to. It's turned out to be right.
Like what? By the way, I'm not suggesting you should do this. We all know about the dumping the dead bear in the Central Park story, right? I mean, that turned out to be true. How about... All right, I'm just going to let you do this. Google RFK Jr. or just RFK and whale, W-H-A-L-E. And tell me what you find. I can't be stunned. No, I cannot be stunned anymore. You know, we have come so far, America. We have come so far from dog in the crate on top of the family station wagon to decapitating a whale and putting its head in the vehicle while the kids look on with plastic bags over their heads so that they don't get any of the gush, the guts, the blood, or whatnot from daddy stuffing the whale head in what the absolute and he wafted that endorsement around like it meant something. By the way, I'm going to give you my gut instinct on the RFK endorsement. I think anyone still saying that they were going to vote for that guy, it's probably an even split. That's the ugly little secret. Yeah, there were, some folks who were a little more right of center, who sick of the Trumpiness, who were just looking for anybody else to vote for that wasn't a Democrat. And look, there's one right there. So I think RFK was getting a little bit of that. I think that RFK was probably getting a little bit of the super far left, the maybe even the Gaza part. There was probably some disaffected or just folks who were like, I can't vote for the octogenarian. I can't vote for Biden. Look how old he is. I think there was some of that. But I think at the end of the day, his support is probably going to split just about down the middle or just not vote at all. And that's fine too. At least it is the way polling's showing right now. Have you seen that? The Hill reporting that Vice President Kamala Harris holds a 7-point edge over former President Donald Trump nationally in a poll released Friday, marking the latest gain for the Democratic presidential candidate as the general election approaches. The survey from Fairleigh Dickinson University found that Harris beats Trump nationally with a 50% support. 50% is such a huge... I mean, that's the number. When you have 50%, Donald Trump never hit 50%. Never. 50% support to 43% for Donald Trump, while 7% of respondents said they will vote for someone else. Trump and Harris fare equally well with voters from their respective parties, each having 95% support from their partisans, pollsters found. Reading a little further down, with independents who do not lean toward either party, Harris still leads Trump. Smaller margin here, 38 to 33%, the poll found. Harris holds a large lead among self-identified liberals, 87% to 10%, along with progressives, 93% to 5%. Well, that's weird. You would think it would, okay. And moderates, 62% to 30%. Former president, meanwhile, leads amongst conservatives, 76 to 19%, and MAGA voters, 95 to 4%. Again, that poll came out Friday. I don't even know if her acceptance speech really had a chance to marinate in the minds of folks who were asked that. We'll be seeing new polling coming out in the coming days now that the convention has subsided and folks have had a chance to marinate on that. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today on The Ron Show. I want to thank you for listening. We do air weekdays, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. weekdays on America One Radio, also 7 to 8 p.m. at Progressive Voices via TuneIn. That's new, and I'm so thrilled to be on Progressive Voices. And, of course, we always podcast the show and provide you show notes at ronshowatl.com. And I know I said I'm going to go to the lake later this week, and I probably am, but I'm going to take the sound equipment with me because it's going to be a busy week. I can just see it now. Anyway, show notes, ronshowatl.com. Did I say that already? All right, have a great evening.